How many people here didn't get enough pizza? How many people here really want a cactus? Okay, so should we just say like the first tweet, the most popular tweet gets the first pizza? So this is called growth hacking. You find something the customer actually wants, not a cactus. Just saying. These are really good shot glasses, though. If you filled that with like tequila or something, I'm just kidding. They're really nice cacti. We were taking pictures and we put one on the corner of the ledge there, and I'm like, what could possibly go wrong? It's a gigantic, that one, on a ledge over a tourist street. I'm like, this is Darwinism in effect. Hi, I'm Alistair. I am going to talk to you about lean analytics for a while. Hopefully it'll be interesting. It'll also be fairly informal, so if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We are going to talk about three things today. We're going to talk about lean analytics, which is this book, and also a way of using data to build a better business faster. The original title for the book was going to be Startup Metrics, but everybody loves the word lean, so it was good marketing. And it was authored in conjunction with Eric Ries. It's very much a continuation of the book, The Lean Startup. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what lean analytics is, go through that quickly. Then I'm going to talk about the idea of exploits and growth hacks, and then I'm going to come back to how not to fail. That's actually an entirely different set of presentations that I've done in the past, and I commingled them here. You'll be able to tell because I'm so lazy that I didn't change the fonts, so they look like different presentations. But it is like the second time I've ever done that, so it'll be useful, I hope. So part one, lean analytics. The first and most basic rule of lean startup, if anybody here seen the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, they say, if you build it, they will come. That's awful advice. If they come, you should build it, right? Don't sell what you can make what you can sell. This is the most basic rule of lean startup. Figure out what you can sell, then make that. Silicon Valley doesn't like failure. They just hate it less than the alternative, which is building something that nobody wants. That's a waste of your time and energy, right? So at the core of this process of lean startup is this constant cycle of have an idea and build something, and then based on what you build, measure what that thing does in the market and use that to learn. So your first product is not a product to be successful as a product. It's a tool to learn what you should have built in the first place. That's a very important idea because then you don't get proud of whether your product is good or not. You get proud of whether your product taught you something or not. It's a very different philosophy. The problem with this is that all of us thinks we have a really good idea and we're all liars, me included. All of us are liars. We delude ourselves into thinking that our idea is awesome, right? So, I mean, here's that cycle. Your idea is the best. You got into this to build things. That's why you do this. How many people here are pretty confident that when they say they can do something like write code or design a web page or whatever, they can do it? Raise your hand up high. How many people here are really confident they can convince other people to do things even though they have no control over them? So where's the risk? The risk is not can you build it. The risk is will anybody care? You've got ideas, that's great, everyone's great, and you build things and you love that stuff, that's not always a good thing. Things kind of fall apart in the measure part, either because you didn't instrument things, or because you're so convinced that it's a good idea you don't need to measure things, or because the measurements are so sad you sweep them under the rug and tell yourself it'll be better in the future. I have no idea where the future will be better when there's like more cruft and more features if you can't get people to use the basic product. And then finally, you didn't learn anything, so you have no data, no learning, no next product. This is a big problem because most startups, when they start, have no idea what they're going to be. PayPal, for example, was first built as a payment tool for Palm Pilots. FreshBooks, which is a really popular invoicing tool, was originally built as a web design company that got fed up with doing manual invoicing. Wikipedia was going to hire 1,000 people to write it. It was only going to be written by paid experts. Mitel was a lawnmower company that became a telecommunications company. Hotmail was 2 people building a database, cheating on their day jobs, who needed a way to mail each other back and forth. And so they created a web-based email, and they went to see Draper, Fisher, Jurvetson, and DFJ said, your database sucks. Show me that email thing again. Flickr was going to be a massively multiplayer online game. And it turns out that people were uploading images to Flickr, and they went, oh, okay, we're a photo sharing thing. So the founders of Flickr went to Yahoo for a while, left Flickr, and then said, we're finally going to build that video game. And in order to build that video game and coordinate their distributed team, they came up with some tools to help them coordinate themselves in a group. Does anybody know what that company is called? Slack. So they did it again. Twitter was a podcasting company. Autodesk made desktop automation. If you wonder why a 3D modeling company is called Autodesk, it's because they made desktop automation. Startups have no idea what they're going to be. You have no idea what you're going to be when you grow up. And analytics can help you this because analytics is the measurement of movement towards your business goals. In a startup, the reason you use analytics is to find the product market fit, that magical unicorn of I figured out what to sell to people in a certain market I can reach before the money runs out. Analytics is about tracking the right metrics. And a good metric has 4 fundamental attributes. The first thing is a good metric is understandable. If you're spending your time explaining the metric to people, they're not talking about your business, they're talking about what the metric means. It should be no more complicated than like a golf score. I was supposed to get into the hole in 5 and I got there in 7. I understand. It must be comparative. How did we do against last week, against last month, against the competition? Otherwise, I just tell you, I've got 17. Well, is that good or bad? I have no idea. It must be a ratio or a rate. It doesn't have to be, but usually is. There's usually a tension between 2 things in a company. If I spend more money, I get more revenue. But I want to know what's the ratio between those 2, for example. If I hire more employees, I deliver code sooner, maybe there's a ratio there. This is like miles per hour in a car. Miles per hour, kilometers per hour is a good metric because it shows me one thing, distance covered, and the other time consumed. And there's a tension between those 2 things that I need to know. And finally, it's got to be behavior changing. And this is the single most important line in the book. We're happy to report it's also the most highlighted line in the book. If a metric won't change how you behave, it is a bad metric. Lots of people create numbers because it makes them feel like they're doing something. When someone shows me a metric, I'm like, so how is this going to change your behavior? I don't know. Then why did you collect it? Well, if it's over 5%, we're going to do this. Ah, now I care. There's your baseline. What's it at today? 3%. Okay. How are you going to change it? Now we're having a real conversation about your business. Let me give you a concrete example of a metric that changes your behavior. Let's say you're an e-commerce company. You're doing transactions. You can measure the number of customers that come back and buy from you again a second time within 90 days. That's a pretty simple metric. Super important, almost nobody measures it. So imagine that you have that data and you know that less than 15% of your customers buy from you a second time in 90 days. What does that mean? It means you're an acquisition-focused e-commerce provider. You're focused on acquiring new customers, not keeping them around. That's okay. If you're selling wedding rings and someone's buying a wedding ring every week, that's weird. I mean, maybe there's a business there, but it might be a little creepy. However, you don't want to offer like money-back guarantees on your wedding rings, right? It's not satisfaction. You're going to get that person once. You want to charge them as much as you can. You want to no refunds, no take-backs. You want to charge them for insurance, for cleaning services, for certification. You want to get them to tweet and tell all their friends and upload pictures because you have them once. You want to extract as much as you can from that one experience. On the other hand, if you've got people where more than 30% of your customers buy from you a second time in 90 days, maybe you're in the pizza business. I haven't seen any tweets yet. That was great timing, by the way, dude. Perfect. Thank you. I know. I'm sorry we kept you hungry. They were waiting backstage for just that line. I'm kidding. Have some pizza.
You guys don't wait to your neighbor if you don't want to, but we have a couple and
That was perfect timing, dude. I was like, maybe you're in the pizza business, so you came out. If you're doing pizza, you're in the loyalty business, right? You know someone's going to buy from you over and over again. One individual pizza is not that important. Your margins are pretty low. So if you're in the pizza business and the order is late, it's free if it's more than 30 minutes, right? That makes sense because you want that person to come back. If you're doing produce delivery and the groceries are bad, you send them a gift basket and apologize. You wouldn't do that in a wedding ring business, but you do it in a grocery business. And so loyalty-focused companies that want someone to keep coming back have an entirely different set of marketing imperatives. You care about how loyal are customers, how big is my inventory, what's the selection size, whereas for acquisition, I care about high conversion rate, low acquisition cost. Most of the e-commerce companies I talk to have no idea what percentage of their customers buy from them a second time in 90 days. There's nothing wrong with being one or the other. There's everything wrong with not knowing. This is like one of the most fundamental metrics for e-commerce, but most people don't even think about it. And this metric would change your behavior entirely. So not knowing the right metric kills you, but if you know the right metric, it will change your behavior, and that's a good metric. Some other important stuff about metrics: qualitative versus quantitative. Qualitative is, that pizza's delicious. Quantitative is, it took me 7 bites to finish it. Qualitative is soft, it's messy, it's fuzzy, it's very hard to aggregate, but it's usually very, very useful in discovering the unanswered question or the things your customers need that you didn't know they needed. On the other hand, quantitative is very hard numbers, facts. It's great, but it's really hard to find hidden truths in that, right? You survey people, they don't volunteer additional information. Another important aspect of metrics is the difference between an exploratory metric and a reporting metric. So an exploratory metric, for example, is I don't know what I'm looking for, but I'm just digging around and swimming in the data to look for ideas. And a reporting metric is like, I know I don't know how many sales we made this month. I'm going to go ask. Now I've got the data. I should give it to my accountant. That's much more static. Another way to look at data, oh no, thanks, I already picked out, that's why nobody else got some. Another way to look at the data is to understand the difference between cohorts and segments and so on. So this is the most sort of analytics terms slide I'm going to give you. Imagine I launch a new product. And in January, I have a few users that use my product, and it kind of sucks, so they all go away. But they used it, and I learned stuff. So in February, I can launch a better product. And then in March, I launch an even better one. And by April, I'm starting to get traffic. I'm retaining them. By May, things are going really well. This is a really typical example of ramping up customers, and we're slicing these horizontally by what we would call a cohort. So a cohort is a group of people that arrived at a particular amount of time, so they're here for a month. I'm looking at the people that came and they experienced the March product. The people who experienced the March product are different from the people who experienced the January product, right? If I slice the other way, cross-sectionally, rather than longitudinally, now I'm doing segmentation. So I can say, show me everybody who came on a sunny versus a cloudy day, or I can create artificial segments, show you everybody that saw a red button versus a blue button, or green button. And unless you're Google and have a lot of traffic so you can do these A/B tests quickly, you probably do something called multivariate analysis, which means I'm going to test a bunch of different factors and find out which combination of factors drives the behavior I want, conversions or subscription or viral sharing or whatever. But do you understand the difference? Cohort this way, segment this way, A/B testing. That's the most statsy slide we're going to see today. So I want to ask you all a question while you're enjoying that pizza. I'm going to show you two companies. I want you to tell me which company is doing better. Here's the first company. And both of these companies, by the way, are adding 1,000 new users a month. Those users may be going away, but they're adding 1,000 to start with. The first company is making an average of $5 of revenue a month in January per customer. In February, that falls to $4.50. I would say euros, but I'm too lazy to change my slides. $4.33 by March, $4.25 by April. Things get a little better in May. It goes up to $4.50. So the average revenue per customer is kind of going down. It's gradually moving up again. How many people think this? I'm going to ask you, doing well, stagnating, or doing poorly? How many people here think this company is doing really well? How many people think it's stagnating? How many people think it's doing poorly? Okay. I'll show you a second company. I'm going to show you the data differently, though. For this company, I'm going to show you a cohort model. So I'm going to say in January, customers spent $5 on average. The January customers in February spent $3. In March, they spent $2, then $1, then 50 cents. February customers come along. They do a little better. So they spend $6 in their first month. And it goes down. And then 7, and then 8. And by May, they're spending $9 in their first month. How many people think this company is doing well? How many people think this company is doing poorly? How many people think it's stagnating? How many people now realize they're the same company? So let me show you the data differently. In the first month, they were at 5. They went down to 50 cents. In the second month, these guys were at 5. These were at 6. But what we're actually doing is just saying the average of 3 and 6. And then the average of these ones. And then the average of these ones. And the average of these ones. And by then, it's sucking because these guys who had this awful experience in January are dragging down the awesomeness of 9 with 50 cents. You're polluting this amazing business you've created that closes people at $9 a month, where you've actually grown your first month revenue 50% while continuing to close customers. You're polluting that with this awful experience of the people who had your first product. I have a friend who went to close funding and he used the averages model, the first one, and couldn't close a deal. All he did was change to this, closed an oversubscribed round. People don't understand how to look at data properly. Cohorts are super expensive. In a big company, you're not making a new product every week. In a small company, you're making a new product every day. And if you don't have a difference between the user experience on day 1 and day 20 and day 50, you're not changing your products enough. Why would you pollute the users from the last great thing you built with those users that you had on the day you didn't know anything about your market? Why would you drag yourself down with the past? You're reinventing the product, you're reinventing the market. Why are you dragging along those poor victims you experimented on, your guinea pigs you don't really care about? So let me talk about the lean analytics framework. Ben and I are great thieves, and we like to steal other people's ideas, so we stole some from Eric Ries, who wrote The Lean Startup. Eric says that any sustainable company grows based on the actions of its customers. If your company is growing based on your actions, that's not sustainable. If your company is growing based on the customer's actions, that's sustainable. And so one way to grow is what's called the stickiness engine. Stickiness just says keep people coming back. If you have customers and they keep coming back, you'll make money. And the math that matters here is, can you get customers faster than you lose them? Pretty simple, right? By the way, like 2 slides, you won't have to read the book. The second thing is virality. Virality is, can I get people to invite their friends? If people invite their friends, I will grow. And the question here is, how many of them will tell their friends, and how fast will they tell them? Virality is not just about how many friends you tell and how many of them follow up on that offer. It's about how quickly they do it. Because if I have 10% virality, in other words, think about interest rates. If I tell you I'm going to give you 10% compounded annually versus 1% compounded daily, I know which one I'd choose, right? The cycle time is way better. So even if your viral percentage is not as high, if the cycle time is fast, that's a great thing. And the third group is price or revenue. I'm going to spend some money to get my customers. And the question is, how much money are my customers bringing in, and how much of that can I spend to acquire them? Is it costing me less to acquire a new customer than I get from that customer? As long as one of these 3 things is true, you'll grow. And we actually think all 3 should be true. So I'll talk about that in a sec. The second person we stole unapologetically from is Dave McClure. Dave wrote this amazing blog post called Pirate Metrics, in which he talks about the customer life cycle, which consists of acquisition, getting people, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. And because those 5 things spell R, he decided to call this Pirate Metrics. We think Dave's a brilliant guy, but a horrible artist, so we decided to draw it properly. So in acquisition, the question here is, how do your users become aware of you? How do they learn you exist? The next stage is activation. Those people that are aware of you, can you get them to engage with you in some way where now they're signed up, or they're following, or they're doing something, they've tried things out, they're starting to get aware of what you do, they're active as potential users. Then there's retention. They came and tried you once, how do I get them to keep coming back? Am I allowed to notify them of stuff, and so on? Then there's the revenue stage, and revenue is simply, can I extract money from those users? And finally, there's this referral stage. Do users go and promote your product? So this is Dave McClure's Pirate Metrics model. Dave's a smart guy. This is a great way to think about it. And by the way, when it comes to growth hacking, what you're actually talking about is, how do I increase all of these things? How do I increase acquisition? How do I increase activation, retention, revenue, referral? Growth hacking is usually using a combination of humans and machines to scalably increase one of these metrics. Yes?
Would you advise a particular order to improve these?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for coming. You can have a cactus, sir. So some smart people suggested that we put these in a particular order. You really can have a cactus. That was a great question. So Ben and I think you should do it in this order. Thank you, sir. So we actually think this stuff should happen in a specific sequence, and there's a reason for that. The first thing you got to do is find empathy. I have found a real, poorly met need that a reachable market faces. Those words are very important. It's real. People aren't just saying they like it. It's poorly met. Their current solutions are not good. It's a reachable market. I can get to it efficiently, and it's a market, meaning there's enough of it to make money off. Empathy means understanding that need. So I'm going to give you a trick that we've used recently. This isn't in the book, but it's a really useful trick for customer development. I have gone and talked to customers when I'm doing customer development for ideas, and I sit down and I explain my product and I hear their feedback and so on. And then at the end of it, I go, do you know anybody else who'd be interested in this product or service? And they either say yes or no. If they say yes, I'm like, oh, good. Could you call them? If they say no, wow, that's a bad sign, right? They don't feel smart telling people. I know the virality is going to be bad. Maybe the product wasn't any good. If they say yes, I'm like, could you call them? If they are unwilling to call them, then I'm like, okay, you're not proud of this idea. It doesn't make you feel smart, so maybe you wouldn't share it even though you liked it. If they call them, I'm like, okay, explain it to that person. And now I see if they can tell my message to somebody else. Did my message resonate enough that they could repeat it? I understand how they heard it. I can adjust my pitch. And then when they're done explaining, I go, can I talk to them? And they're like, handing your phone to someone, that's weird, right? So like maybe they're surfing the wrong stuff on it. So if they give me the phone, I'm like, hey, how you doing? Can we set up a meeting? This is great. And I've done this, and like out of those 10 people, one's talking to me. I got 3 leads. I know that, that's a really good measurement. So people talk about customer development as soft and unquantifiable. I'll tell you, if you do every meeting, and Ben and I have a blog post on scoring customer interviews, but if you end every interview with this, and what percentage of people could name a friend who'd care, were willing to call that friend, the friend picked up the phone for them, they could properly explain it to that friend, they were willing to let me talk to them, the friend agreed to a meeting. That's some pretty hard quantitative data. I didn't write one line of code to test my idea. It's also really uncomfortable. Sorry. I mean, we already decided that the problem is not that you guys can build stuff, it's that nobody cares. So you have to put yourself out there and find out if people care. Otherwise, you're just wasting everyone's time and money. And maybe that's what you want to do. Maybe you like the money from the incubator and the cool glasses and funky socks you get to wear. But if you actually want to build a business someone cares about, you're going to have to get awkward. Once you've done that, the stickiness stage is, can I get people coming back? Because if I get them using it once, unless I'm like a one-time acquisition-focused e-commerce company, I need to focus on whether or not they'll keep coming back. Because they may say it's nice, use it, but they're not real users. So you need to know what an engaged user looks like. Once they're sticky, I can focus on virality, getting them to tell their friends. What's the point in getting them to tell their friends if when their friends arrive, they're just going to leave because it's not sticky? So do stickiness before virality. Once it's viral, take some money from what they do and apply it to acquiring new customers. You should do virality before revenue because when you have virality, every time you acquire a customer, you're actually acquiring like 1.3 customers. So your cost of customer acquisition is divided by 1.3, not by 1. So you're amortizing the cost over 1.3 customers, which means it's cheaper to acquire the customer. And once you've got revenue and you're able to fuel your growth that way, then you need to scale. And scale means growing revenues or users in a non-linear way relative to your costs of your business. Yes?
Does that depend on the amount of money you can gain from, let's say, investors? Because I can imagine you can scale up to a certain size before thinking about revenue.
Yes, so you can definitely do that. The challenge here is actually a cash flow problem. Because if I have a software as a service business and the average user sticks around for 2 years, but it takes me 6 months of their revenue to pay the cost of acquisition, then I'm loaning every user money for 6 months. That's a cash flow thing. And if I can show the business model to a bank and they're a smart bank, they'll go, I'm willing to loan you cash flow for 6 months based on your numbers, right? So it's a working capital issue. Like that's one of the places where I wouldn't advise someone to go close equity. I would say use working capital for that because you're just essentially saying, look, I'm not a bank. I need to loan this money to people. So it's an issue. You need to be sure that your model works, right? Yes?
Do as well, because I think at home they won't give you any capital, working capital at the banks, even not first half. They just don't get it at all. But what you can do is just let your customers prepay for 12 months, 8% rebate. That's effectively only 4. So it's a really cheap way to get the cash flow in.
Yeah, prepayment is good. There's a huge liability to it. If I say prepay, how long until I find out you've abandoned me? 12 months. Really bad. So a trick I heard from one company is they sent all their customers a mail 2 weeks after they'd signed up saying, are you still using the product? If you'd like to cancel, let us know. Great customer goodwill, right? You're going to find out right away what the acquisition is. You're going to find out if they've vanished. If they cancel, you can call them up and say, why'd you cancel? Why wasn't it useful? Which is what you want to know. So I'm actually a fan of, you can do the prepayment with, and it's a risky thing to do, prepayment, but you say, look, we're early on, we just want to make sure you're happy. If you'd like to cancel, let us know, we'll refund you everything. Tremendous goodwill. They're probably going to have an interview with you to tell you what they had, which is great, because now you've got a free customer interview, right? And if they don't, then you have a good indicator that they actually find value 2 weeks in. So I like the prepay, but I would add the would you like to cancel model, because otherwise you're blinding yourself to churn. You can't estimate it well. Churn looks good, and then at a year later, everyone falls off a cliff. Yes?
Isn't that exactly one of the most important elements of SaaS companies?
Is to reduce churn?
No, they have the prepaid model, so they have the...
For established ones that have found product market fit, I completely agree.
1 or 2 years, and then they can increase the stickiness. So
But remember that we're talking, so that's fine. Here, we don't know what product we're building yet. Right? This is in the stickiness phase. If you're down here at revenue and scale, yeah, stop asking people if they want to cancel. Because by then you know that your product's good and people use it and you have other metrics for stickiness, right? Don't do it early on, because early on, remember, you're not building a product. You're building a tool to learn what product you should have built in the first place. Make sense? Okay. So as you move through these stages, I think there's a series of things you need to do, and there's different metrics for each stage. But people would say to me, hey, those stages are different depending on the business you're in. Well, you're absolutely right. There's a bunch of different businesses, from e-commerce to two-sided marketplaces to software as a service. Each of those is different. And so the metrics you're going to look at depend on the stage you're at and the business you're in, which means these eye charts that kind of look like this. So I'm going to walk you through it briefly. I don't expect you to see it. They're available online. They're in books. But here is a software as a service systems diagram. Up here I've got customer acquisition cost, a bunch of visitors. And some of those visitors go and make it to a freemium trial and enroll and become a user. So that's my acquisition part. This user is now using the application. So up here, this is acquisition, this is activation. This user is either disengaged, they like signed up and never use it, or they're engaged, they keep using the thing. And maybe I can do some things to reactivate the disengaged users. Hey, we haven't seen you in a couple of days, what do you think? At some point, those disengaged users just churn. They become former users. And then the trial is over. And assuming it's like a trial, not a freemium model, this trial is over, there's an abandonment rate. These people are just abandoned, but some of those people become paying customers. So if they become paying customers either during the trial or after the trial, now I have paying customers, and they may hit some kind of a capacity limit where I'm upselling them. So this is the revenue section, right? I'm upselling them to this, so this is all revenue. You know, they need more storage, they need more contacts, they need more whatever. And then at some point, that paying customer is either going to be dissatisfied or become disengaged. And when they do, I might be able to reactivate them as a paying customer, or I might be able to fix their support problem and resolve it and keep them satisfied. But eventually, almost all things must end, and so down here they'll cancel their account, or their billing info will expire, and then they're former customers. Notice that I've got acquisition, activation, revenue, referral. So all these pieces are already built in there, right? And so when I look at this system, each of these has a metric: customer lifetime value, support data, viral coefficient, reactivation rate, paid conversion. Each of these is a metric that you need to understand for your business model. And if you have a business model, this is literally a spreadsheet turned into a picture. Like if you've built a business model, it probably looks like this. We assume we will have 50 customers a day, and of those 10 will actually become users, and of those 3 will do this. That's a spreadsheet that you build to model your business. I've just drawn it as a picture. If you don't have a spreadsheet like that for your business, which is your hypothesis, you probably should have one, because otherwise it's just a hobby. So if I've got a diagram like this that shows the stages people are going through, and I have these numbers that I care about, I better make sure that whatever product or service I'm building is instrumented to collect that data. It's a pretty good place to start. Now, the number of companies I sit down with where they have no idea what this, I do this with big companies, and they sit in a room and I say, 4 of you get together and draw me this for your business, and 2 hours later they're yelling at each other. They have no idea what their business is. I'm like, how do you not know this? So a couple more hours, some coaching, they figured out a diagram. I'm like, great, that's good. What are the numbers? And they write the little things on and go, okay, what's your number for paid conversion? What's your number for this? And usually that's the end of the first day. And then the next morning they come back and they're like, I don't know the answer to half those numbers. Nobody at our company does. Okay, go fix that. And I've actually done this where like I go away for 2 weeks and then I come back for a second engagement and they're like, okay, we got the numbers now. They're pretty miserable. Okay, show me your business model. Well, here's what the assumptions are. Maybe they have one. Show me the numbers. Here's what they are. Which ones are on fire? These ones. Guess what you're working on tomorrow? And then you go through and you figure out how to grow that assumption. This is a really good way, if you're trying to understand the growth of a business, to think about it in a disciplined way. Draw your systems diagram like this. Have your business plan with your assumptions. Measure what reality is. And then figure out what's most unreal and fix it. And if you can't fix it, you either have to change your business model or you have to give up and go do something else. So the good news is that by having these diagrams, I know what business you're in, I know what stage you're at, and I can tell you the one metric that matters to your business. People say, really, just one? And I say, yes, one, because I like having closed captioning. And so in a startup, the reality is that focus is really, really hard to achieve. It's your biggest problem. And having only one metric addresses this problem. If you're parking your car here in Amsterdam, what's the one metric that matters? Whether you're in the canal, but yeah. It's distance. It's the distance from something behind you, right? If your engine light comes on, you're going to stop and find out what's wrong with your engine light. But you have one metric, which focuses you on the task of parking your car without hitting something, called distance from the thing behind you. It's okay to focus on a metric because metrics are kind of like squeeze toys. Like if I have conversion and I optimize that, then shopping cart size bulges out. And if shopping cart size bulges out, then returns bulge out or whatever those metrics are. There's always another metric that's going to come because it's dictated by my business model. So I would show you an eye chart that looks like this, that says, hey, early on there's empathy, but e-commerce, I have a bunch of different metrics. And inventory, these are all business models that make money from transactions. Software as a service or mobile makes money from the number of active subscribers. User-generated content and media makes money from ad clicks. I would show you this eye chart, but it's hard to read and I wouldn't expect you to read it. So take a picture of this instead. If you go to bit.ly/big lean table, and the capitalization matters. You have to actually put in capital B, capital L, capital T. bit.ly/big lean table. There's a 3-page PDF there that will have all of the stuff I just showed you in that grid with like a paragraph of explanation. So it's nicer on your eyes than having to try and interpret a slide. Or you can just yell at your Runin team and they'll probably give you the slide anyway. So now I've told you why you need to look at these metrics, right? But you need to know what the line in the sand is. If I tell you that a company loses a quarter of its customers every year, is that good or bad? How many people think it's good? How many people think it's bad? How many people don't feel like raising their arm? Oh, paradox. You all fell for that. I can't believe it. So how many people think it's good that you're losing a quarter of your customers a year? How many think it's bad? It depends on your business, right? So the reality is WP Engine, we talked to those guys, they were losing, the CEO was freaking out. I'm losing a quarter of my customers a year. He went and talked to a few people like Matt Mullenweg from WordPress, and Matt's like, come work for me, you're awesome. It turns out that 2% churn a month is really, really good, and they should have been focusing on something else like cost of acquisition or maximizing revenue from the user or whatever. Not knowing what normal is makes you do really stupid things. For example, if you're not growing your customers or your revenue by 5% a week, you should not be a startup. In the early stages of growth, if you can't grow at 5 to 7% a week, you need to have a long, hard conversation with the rest of your founders. 5 to 7% a week is what Paul Graham considers healthy for a Y Combinator startup. And I don't want to hear, well, we're 3%, but we're the biggest in Holland. No, it's the internet, right? Was that a condescending enough voice? So I'm punchy. I've already done this presentation once and I've had like 3 beers, so I'm going to be insulting by the end of the evening. So knowing that that's normal now says, hey, we're not growing fast enough. We should focus on another aspect of the business rather than saying, well, we got a couple of customers this week. It's okay. Fred Wilson talks about this. He says 30% of your users per month will use your app. So you may have 100 users, 30 of them will use it that month. Of those, 10 will use it that day. And at any given time, 1% of your users will be on the site concurrently. These are really good for capacity planning. Simple rules, right? Just knowing these numbers tells you whether you're normal. Churn. We talked about churn earlier. Getting 2 to 5% churn is pretty good. The best software as a service companies in the world get 1.5 to 3% a month. And they have PhDs working on the problem. You should get below a 5% churn before you move ahead. Remember that stickiness thing? How do you get below a 5% churn? And then when you're actually ready to step on the gas and go to the scaling stage, you better be at 2%. Anybody ever try to leave Facebook? I can't quit you, right? So they put a little picture of me with a little tear photoshopped right here. That reduces abandonment from Facebook by 7%. Emotional appeals work well. So how do you calculate customer lifetime and customer lifetime value? Well, if I know that a quarter of my customers leave every month, then the average lifetime of a customer is 4 months. It's pretty simple, right? If a quarter leave in a month, then on average, someone's around for 4 months. It's just 100 divided by 25 gives you 4. If I know that 5% of my customers leave every month, then the customer lifetime is 20 months. 2% means I've got them for 50 months. Everyone understand the math? So now I know what my average customer lifetime is. I can figure out how much I can afford to spend on them, because the rule of thumb is don't spend more than a third of your customer lifetime value on your customer acquisition cost. It's just a good rule of thumb. As I said earlier, when you're giving someone money, you're essentially lending them money to acquire them. You want to minimize that. You're also probably optimistic about how long they'll stick around. Other things happen. And so if I have customers where I know their lifetime is 20 months, in other words, 5% a month leave. At any given month, I'm losing 5% of my customers. Hopefully I'm adding more, but I'm losing 5% at any given time. Well, then let's assume I'm making $30 per customer. That means I'm making $600 customer lifetime value. That's how you calculate customer lifetime value. And if I have that $600, I know I should only spend a third of it, so I can spend up to $200 acquiring a customer. I got to wait a third of their lifetime to get the money back. Right? It's not going to be until month like 8 that I'm going to start to get some money back from those guys. But Ideally, I would now go and segment it. I would find out that everybody on Twitter spends more time, or every mother actually sticks around longer, or everybody who has 2 kids becomes a longer term user. And I realize that I can then spend more money to acquire that person using targeted advertising or whatever other techniques, and I can bring those people on. So there are a bunch of other metrics. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. When Ben and I wrote the book, we had been running an accelerator in Montreal called Year One Labs. And we didn't know what normal was. So the companies in the lab would say, oh, I'm at 17%. And we're like, of what? Why is that? And nobody knew. So we literally went and called, I think it was 130 VCs, startups, and analysts, and asked them what normal was. So you don't have to. And eventually they told us, and we got some good numbers. And now people are much more open to disclosing this stuff. You'll see people writing blogs a lot of times, like postmortems, they talk about their numbers. So figure out your systems diagram, figure out what your metrics should be, figure out what normal is in the industry, figure out where they are now, decide which ones are broken, go fix them. Sounds easy, right? It's not that easy. So one of the ways you fix that is something we call the lean analytics cycle. So I've picked my KPI. I know which metric I want to change. I've done all this stuff with the systems diagram. I now know what I want to change. I'm going to draw a line in the sand. I have to get churn below 5%. And then I have a potential improvement. I have some idea of how I'm going to fix that. And the potential improvement is either I'm going to make a good guess or steal from my competitors and do what they did, because that seems to work, or I'm going to use data to find some common pattern. I think that everybody who pays a lot of money is on Twitter. I'm going to focus on my advertising on Twitter and see if that changes things. I come up with some kind of hypothesis. And then with that hypothesis, I either change things in production, or if I'm a little more risk averse, I run a test. And I measure the results, and I ask myself, did I move the needle? Did I improve things as I wanted to? 4 possible answers. Yes, you did. Great success. Have a beer. Get back to work. Startups suck. The second one is pivot or give up. I've tried everything. I'm out of money or patience. I'm going to either change my business model or I'm going to get a day job. The third approach is I'm going to draw a new line in the sand. My goal was too difficult. Now, so far, I seem like a pretty obnoxious guy. So when I say to you, oh, I'm sorry, was it too hard? Let's try something easier. That sounds kind of wimpy. So I'm going to tell you a story about why this works. Because the only time you're allowed to change the line in the sand is when the customer gives you permission to do so. So there was a company at Year One Labs called High Score House. And High Score House made a tool that allowed parents to manage chores and rewards for their kids. When they did this, they assumed that parents would sit down every day and they would set, like, these are the things you got to do, you know, take out the garbage and make your bed, and then they'd review that with the kids. And so an engaged user was a family that logged into this app at least once in the last 3 days. That way, if they went away for a weekend, it didn't count as abandoned, but they were tracking it. Sounds pretty reasonable, right? They were getting like 10% engagement. Miserable. So Kyle, in a fit of peak before he shut down the company, decided to call some of the parents. And they said, oh, we love your app. And he said, what do you mean you don't use it? They go, yeah, we use it every Saturday. We sit down and review the chores for the week. By the way, why did you make it so hard to like set a chore for the week? Because I have to go out and go into Monday and go out and go into Tuesday and go out and go into Wednesday. And Kyle's like, oh, you're using the app in an entirely different way from what I thought. So he came away with a piece of validated learning. Hey, I should change the app from daily to weekly focus. And the customer gave him a permission to change what was defined as an engaged user from someone who used it in the last 3 days to someone who used it in the last 10. That's okay. It's all right to change things in that case. The last case is where it didn't work and you've got another idea, try something again. But this cycle of experimentation is how you focus on one of those metrics that you've decided is broken and you keep iterating until it gets better. Now, here's a good example of that, Airbnb. Airbnb is the leading vacation rental owned by owner property, and they had a question. If someone takes a professional photograph of my building or my apartment, do I do better? Their gut instinct was, yeah, professional photography will help our business. They came up with an MVP, which was we will hire 20 field photographers to go out and pretend they're employees and take pictures, and then we'll measure the results to see how those properties do against similar properties that weren't professionally photographed. And then they made a decision, and the decision was, wow, that's really good. Properly photographed things do 3 times as well. Get 3 times as many rentals. So they decided to launch this as a feature. By February 2012, they were doing 5,000 photo shoots a month. I mean, of course they were. This is driving all of their revenues, right? This is the moment where Airbnb did this and everyone else kept doing this. So if you're paying attention, you go, hang on a second, Alistair. That part where they said, I got a gut instinct, hey, I got the hypothesis that maybe these look better, that's pretty lazy. Because remember I said over here, there's either without data or with data. They had a lot of data. So A without data approach would be you wake up in one morning, you're in the shower, and you're like, gee, those houses that do well look really nice. Maybe it's the camera, right? With data, in a perfect world, with the Star Trek computer, you go, hey, computer, what do all the highly rented houses have in common? And the computer would go, it's the camera model. Now, if you did the right analysis, that data's in there. You could look at the EXIF data for the properties and look at resolution and camera model and go, they all correlate with Canon. Okay, maybe there's a clue there. Most people don't analyze all that data, and they probably should. But this is what I mean by data-driven exploration. So I'll give you another example. There was, before Facebook had groups, which I know is before most of you were born, before Facebook had groups, there were tools, third-party tools, that let you do groups. There was one called Circle of Friends. Circle of Friends was an app that you installed that allowed you to invite other people to a group and share things with them and talk with them and so on. It's the kind of thing that became Facebook groups. The founder of Circle of Friends had built this app. It was doing pretty well. 10 million people had used it, but almost nobody ever came back after they created a group. So you were supposed to go on and like create a church group or a soccer team or whatever, and almost nobody came back a second time. He was pretty fed up with this. And he went and looked at those groups, and you know what he found? He found there was one group that was absolutely crazy. That group commented more, posted more stuff, invited more people, clicked on more things. Every metric he wanted, they were like 100% better than everyone else. And that group was mothers. He changed the name of the company to Circle of Moms. He went from 10 million users to 400,000 users, but they were all engaged. And then he drove the engagement up to 4.5 million users and sold it to a company called Sugar. This is a pivot. When people say we're pivoting, that's a pivot. I changed my logo, I changed the name of the company, I shed almost all my users. When people say, oh, I pivoted, I changed the logo. No, this is a pivot, right? You changed your entire business model and focus. Pivoting every day is just a sign that you have an indecisive mind. Give me a reason why you pivoted and the validated learning that made you change, and I'll listen. So this is a good example of data-driven iteration. Now, I don't normally advocate particular tool sets, but I want to say one thing about the tools. There's lots of tools out there for analytics. The reason I put this slide up is that when you are trying to do metrics, once upon a time, if you used Google Analytics, that was like the tool. You can have any tool you want as long as it's Google Analytics. Today, there are vertically focused analytics tools that specialize in a particular market or a particular stage. So Totango, for example, focuses on software as a service. And if you deploy that and you're a SaaS company, it's going to be much easier to measure things like who's going to churn. Flurry focuses on publishing. If you're a publisher, it's going to be easier to know about which posts get more traffic and so on. Sorry, not Flurry, Parsley. Flurry focuses on gaming analytics. So each of these guys has a different particular set. These are all tools we work with, we think are great, but they all serve different purposes. So today, people are building their analytics platform out of tools that are more targeted at their vertical, rather than having a generic tool and having to customize their product for it. Okay, we're going to talk about growth hacking now, but any questions on that first part of things? Okay. Growth hacking is a word you should hate, but you're probably going to hear a lot about it. Many people define growth hacking as, I am a marketer and I would like to be paid more, wear cool socks, and have funky glasses. Growth hacking is actually a term that's sort of used to encapsulate a bunch of stuff. But the reality is there's a very specific focus on what it does. Growth hacking is using a combination of people and technology to increase a key metric in your business. I'll talk about some of those metrics in a minute. And usually it's a process of automation. And usually it's a process of finding an unfair advantage or getting a system to do something it wasn't intended to. I think my microphone just, no, I didn't pull it. That's good. This is a guy named Herbert Simon. He's one of my favorite writers ever. He's an economist from the 1970s. And Herbert Simon, when confronted with the information age, said, we do not live in an information age because information is abundant. And ages are defined by what's scarce. So economies are driven by gold or oil or land, things that everybody wants and nobody can have. Information is abundant. What I care about is what information consumes, which is attention. We live in an attention economy because that's the thing that's a scarce commodity. So when that is the case, when you are scarce on attention, you have a real problem because the risk in your business is not can you build it, it's will anyone come. I've built a bunch of startups. I've built a bunch of big companies. I've run conferences on cloud computing and big data. I sold Coradiant to BMC for a lot of money. You guys don't know me, and I'm not trying to brag. How many of you, based on what I just said, think that if I needed to build the architecture, the infrastructure, I could find people to build the infrastructure of a Facebook social network? How many people think anyone will care? Everybody remember Ello? That was a fun 2 weeks, wasn't it? So, if the risk is not will they build it, but will anybody care, how much of your business should be focused on figuring out whether people care, rather than whether you build it? I know you can build stuff. I mean, you guys like building things. It's why you got into startups. And the best part is that if you're the kind of person who really knows they can do stuff, you're kind of like, I can control this. Things I can control I like. Don't, leave me alone. I want to build this thing. It's really good. The part where you go out and find out that nobody likes your idea, or you have to, heaven forbid, talk to humans, that's really difficult and awkward, right? I mean, I have a hard time talking to people. I really feel uncomfortable doing it. Actually, even now. So I'm sorry if I will do the fist bump after. No, but I find it really, really hard to actually get in front of someone and ask them awkward questions, especially when I have a lot invested in their answers. That intellectual honesty is very difficult, but all of the really great startups do it. This is a company called Lit Motors. Lit Motors makes a motorcycle that has gyroscopes in it. If you haven't seen the videos, they're really cool. It's stands up by itself, and when you push it, it kind of corrects itself. And the founder of this company is a brilliant engineer from Stanford. And so he went to build this company, he got some funding, and he spent all the money setting up a showroom in San Francisco and trying to sell this to people. He'd get people to come in, they'd have billboards, they'd have posters, they'd have sales pitches, they'd have a prototype model, whatever, and he would see if he could close people. And every week he'd change how they pitched it, what they said, and so on, change the price, until he could get people to buy it. He was so successful getting people to buy it that he got enough pre-orders that he didn't need a Series A. But the biggest risk that Lit Motors faced was being the next Segway. Right? I mean, you look at this, what's the biggest risk? You don't want to be the next Segway. So how do you fix that? You go and find out how to sell the damn thing, because you know you can build it. Your job is to de-risk the business model. If I know you can build something, why are you spending your time testing whether you can build something? You should be testing whether anyone cares. Anybody know what this is? A little hard to see in the sunlight. Yeah, so this is the playa at Burning Man. I go to Burning Man a lot. I like to DJ at Burning Man. Once upon a time, it was really cool to be a DJ at Burning Man. Nowadays, it's really, really easy to be a DJ. A very good friend of mine is a superstar DJ you guys would happily pay 60 euros to go see live. This is him DJing in front of nobody. Supply and demand sucks. In a world of Facebook, Facebook gives away its data center plans because Facebook is not in the data center business. They're in the attention business, and they're really, really good at it. Amazon, yeah, they're in the attention business. They can show you what things are bought together, what things customers also bought. Amazon is in the business not of selling books, but of understanding demand and predicting it and fueling you towards purchases. These companies are capitalizing on your attention. Once they have your attention, they can recommend things and so on. Supply and demand is awful. So I'm going to tell you why pop music sucks in under a minute. When Rihanna puts out an album, she has songwriters. They have a songwriting camp. It's kind of like a reality show that happens in a rich person's house. They go and bring in songwriters, producers, vocal producers. They have a writing camp. It spends about $78,000 per song to get these people in. Then they spend about $1 million per song to roll it out. This is the sad reality of the music industry. So if that's the case, let's say that your budget is you can spend $100,000 on a song and $1 million on marketing, just like Rihanna. You have two artists. One artist is an amazing musician, not very marketable, a little scruffy, doesn't like to do interviews, doesn't dance very well, amazing musician. The other artist is an average musician, okay voice, you can fix it with auto-tune, but incredibly marketable. So I know I'm going to get a 10-to-1 ROI on my song from the first person. And I'm going to get a 2-to-1 ROI on my marketing from the first person. Over on this side, I'm going to get the opposite. So the math's pretty easy, right? I mean, this guy over here, I'm going to make 3 million ROI. And this guy, and that means I'm getting 2.7 times return on my investment. And this guy over here, I'm going to get a 10.2 million ROI, which means a 9.27 return on my investment. The investment on the right of the crappy musician who's really, really personal, really personable, and really promotable is 3.4 times better. That's why we have Schnooky from the Jersey Shore. That's why we have Britney. That's why we have Skrillex. Sorry, Skrillex. And if you think about Disney, Disney literally is an attention training club. I mean, Britney, Justin, and Christina, This is the Mouseketeers Club. This is like the Mickey Mouse Club when they were all teenagers. That's Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Justin Timberlake. This is a training machine for attention, right? If it gets attention, it doesn't even need to be real. Anybody know what this is? I'm getting obscure now. This is Hatsune Miku. Hatsune Miku is an animated character. I saw this performance in New York. She's a virtual pop star. The software is something called Vocaloid, and you basically type the lyrics, you write the music, and it plays the music as lyrics. She sings it, and you can buy like an Enya sounding Vocaloid. And so the Hatsune Miku Vocaloid has a live band, and this woman projected as an animation, singing and dancing. 40,000 people go to her concerts in Japan. By the way, it's awesome. It's really good. They hand out glow sticks to everyone. It's amazing. I'll tell you a little funny story. So they have like 4 or 5 screens, and in the middle they have this camera that's going back and forth like this, so they can cut to that camera and show cool pan shots because they're showing all the stuff. And there's like one guy, and his job for 2 hours is to push and pull this camera. And he looks so angry, and he just looks like he lost a bet, and he's the guy that has to push the camera for 2 hours. It's awesome. Anyway. Even if you are a talented artist, like say Lady Gaga, you still need to wear a meat dress to get attention, which is really, really sad. So is there a better way? I think there's a better way, and I think this is the key to growth hacking that doesn't suck, where you're not actually tricking people into doing stuff, which is to spend $10,000 on your song, $10,000 on your marketing, and 100,000 hours, as much as you can, on being interesting. Because in a world where attention is scarce, what do we pay attention to? Literally pay attention. We pay attention to what is interesting. So this band, OK Go, made a video dancing on treadmills over a couple of weekends. Today, they have a Super Bowl commercial. They have the This Too Shall Pass Rube Goldberg machine, which had a State Farm, was sponsored by State Farm. They have a cartoon for a commercial for a Chinese furniture store. They found an entirely new business model by being interesting. So all this talk about growth hacking, it's nice to talk about growth hacking and all that, but the reality is find a way to be interesting and novel is a really, really good start to this. And people don't spend enough time thinking about how do I be interesting to overcome the attention problem. There's a really good book by Dan and Chip Heath called Made to Stick. That's all about why we learn stories and tell stories. It's really, really good. I strongly recommend you look at that. So Made to Stick, it's called. So it's orange. It's got a piece of duct tape across the front. Not real duct tape. So there's some more things about metrics we didn't talk about. One is the idea of lagging versus leading metrics. A lagging metric explains the past. So if I look at sales that I have this month, it explains pipeline I had before. If I look at abandonment I had this month, it might tell me something about customer bugs I had the week before. A leading metric is something like if I know it now, I can predict the future. Maybe if I knew how many support calls I was getting this month, I could predict what sales would be like next month or what churn would be like. And this is important because we have to understand correlation. So there's a very strong correlation between 2 simple household terms, ice cream and drowning. It is well known that ice cream is strongly correlated with drowning. Does anybody here think we should ban ice cream? Usually there's like one lactose intolerant person in the room who's like, yes, please. So when ice cream consumption goes up, drowning deaths go up. And you're all horrible people for not wanting to save those poor victims. What's wrong with you? The reality, of course, is that they're correlated, but they are caused by the time of year. In the summer, people swim more and people drown more and people eat more ice cream. And so the causality here is because ice cream and drowning are correlated. The causality is the heat. A correlated metric is 2 variables that may be related, but are dependent on something else, ice cream and drowning. But a causal metric is 2 things, one causes the other, like summertime and drowning. So what is a growth hack? You now have enough information for me to tell you. Growth hacking is simply what marketing should have been doing all along, but it fell in love with Don Draper and his Mad Men opinion too early. You optimize a factor you think is correlated with growth. It's a really simple definition. Growth hacking is about optimizing factors that you think are correlated with growth. And so it's this weird intersection between guerrilla marketing, like little subversive stuff, and also data-driven learning. I'll give you some examples of this. Facebook, for example, knows that if you find 7 friends within 10 days, you're likely to become a long-term user. So they do everything they can in your first 10 days to maximize the number of people you find. If you put at least one file in a Dropbox folder, you are very likely to become a long-term user. So everything they do is focused on like, put that one file in there right now. And so on for almost every company. There's a factor that drives your long-term engagement or some other behavior they want. So let me ask you another question. Anybody here get Nigerian spam? You know that, hello, I am Nigerian royalty. I would like, everybody's seen those, right? I always think when I get those that if they were written better, we'd all be in really big trouble. And that's actually completely not true. So there's a guy named Corman Hurley who works for Microsoft who did a study, and he found that these guys intentionally write the mails badly. Because the number one indicator that you're stupid enough to send money to Nigeria is that you haven't heard of the Nigerian email scam. Right? The Nigerian scammer is purposely vetting you to see if you're an idiot, because he doesn't want to talk to people who aren't. And so, imagine, for example, that you have 1,000 emails that you send out, and you get like 0.1% conversion. Of that, you get 1 or 2 responses. They know that they're going to be a 70% chance they can close that person. On the other hand, imagine you wrote the emails really well. Now you get good language, you get a 10% conversion. Yeah, I'm convinced this is really my Aunt Mavis who wants to give me some money. This would be horrible. There's 100 humans, 99 of them would figure out it was a scam and report you to the FBI, and you have to change internet cafes in Nigeria. This would be a really bad thing. So it turns out the word Nigeria is the best way to identify prospects. Nigerian spammers are smarter than all of you. Nigerian spammers understand their target market and do not look at vanity metrics. I don't care about your open rate. I care about how many people send money to Nigeria. Think about it that way. So growth hacking is picking a metric to change, and it must not be a vanity metric. Growth hacking must be number of users who pay, number of people who talk about this, whatever that thing you're trying to do is that's core to your business model. Remember that metric you defined that was really important for stickiness, or for revenue, or for scale, or for virality? Find a correlation. What is correlated with it? The fact that someone is a mom, whether the picture was taken with a professional camera. Test the causality. Set up an experiment using that cycle to say, if I do this thing, does it get statistically better? If so, optimize the hell out of that causal factor. Do it tactically, build it into the product, change your roadmap, everything. That's growth hacking. It's a lot less of a smarmy term when you think about it in those terms. Because a leading causal metric is a superpower. If I know a metric that causes the thing I want to happen ahead of time, I can change the future. So, social action, for example, if I'm a nonprofit or a charity, a user that takes some kind of social action, sharing something, is 4 times more likely to donate than someone who doesn't. Now, I don't know if that's causal or correlated. I just know that's a stat that I saw. But if I were, I have no idea why it doesn't say the letters up there for some reason. If I were trying to improve a nonprofit's business, I would really want to find out whether this was causal or not. Because if it was causal, I would urge people like 7 times during the donation process, please tell your friends. If they take a social action, they're more likely to donate. So I'd be like telling people, could you please share this? Could you please share this? Over and over again. Because I know that when they do share it, and then I finally ask them to say, well, you haven't donated yet, they're much more likely to do so. If it's causal. If it's just correlated, maybe they're sharing it because they already donated and they want to brag. How about mobile use? Social mobile users are 7 times more likely to donate than non-social mobile users. So do I really, really care about this stuff? Yeah, I want to find, if I'm going to target groups, who's social and mobile. These are good examples of growth hacks, experiments to run. Now, when Ben and I wrote this book, we almost stopped and wrote another book. And the other book was going to be called Exploit. Because the idea behind growth hacking is to find a system and get it to do something it wasn't intended to do. If you've ever understood security or you think about hacking, hackers look for an exploit. An exploit is a way of getting a system to do something it's not supposed to. Like the heartbleed bug, for example, was a way of getting a system to do something it wasn't supposed to. And when the security researchers find the solution, they patch it, they patch the exploit. Every single company we talked to that was successful had found an exploit at some point. They were evil. They found something evil. I'm going to show you a couple that those companies will publicly deny, but I have screenshots. But the reality is that these ideas usually have some kind of subversive element. They usually got a system to do something. Just like hacking, there are lots of script kiddies out there, right? In growth hacking, you may have a known pattern that gets you 10,000 emails, or a known pattern that gets 1,000 people to sign up. That's not a 0-day exploit. That's a script kiddie hack. And it's fine to run those scripts for growth, but the really big changes for the real market leaders come from doing things that allow them to grow inordinately fast by taking advantage of a system. There was a company called NotchUp a couple of years ago that was a referral-based recruiting service where they basically wanted to get a library of everybody and who they knew, and then they would go to recruiters and say, this person is qualified for this job. They got to 2 million users in a weekend before LinkedIn shut them down. And the way they did this was they said, hey, Alistair, I'd really like to, I'm going to recommend people, refer people. Anyone in your network that you refer to us, if you're the one that refers them first, you get $1,000 when they get an interview. So they were going to charge recruiters $1,500 and they'd send me 1,000. Everybody was like, yes, I will invite everyone on LinkedIn, because they wanted to be the first to claim their friends so they could make money if that person got a job. Pretty scammy, right? They worked at the time, then LinkedIn changed its APIs and shut them down. They got to 2 million users in a weekend. Airbnb. Airbnb, in its early days, crawled all of Craigslist in violation of its terms of service and then sent fake emails that looked like they were from people saying, hey, I really liked your site, you should list it over here. They'll deny having done this. There's really good evidence of exactly what happened with all of, someone did semantic analysis to see if the words were really just typed by a computer and all this stuff. That's how they got their first batch of customers listed on Airbnb. They'll tell you it was the Obama conference in Washington, D.C. The reality is they crawled Craigslist for all these things to scale their company. Anybody heard of Get Satisfaction? Just got acquired for a horribly small amount of money. So I hope he doesn't work for Airbnb. Get Satisfaction is a company that purports to give you a place to have a conversation with your customers. Their business model was like this. We crawl the web for people complaining about you. Let's say you're Sony. We call the web for people complaining about Sony. We pull in all of the talks and all the complaints about Sony into one place. Google then learns that we're the best place to go for support on Sony. So when someone complains about Sony and does a Google search for it, they find us. They then submit their complaints. Now we go to Sony and say, hey, Sony, we have this forum full of all these complaints. Would you like to pay to access these customers? But worse than that, we pop up a little message that says, hey, customers, these guys don't care about you. This is 37 Signals. 37 Signals is a pretty cool software development company, right? Basecamp and that, they're pretty responsive. This says, 37 Signals has not yet committed to open conversation about its products and services. Encourage them to join and support the company customer pact. That's called blackmail. This is extortion. That's how this is how Get Satisfaction grew, yes?
Is it LinkedIn doing the same? Because I always see people you may know, and I always see my mother, their email address, and I'm pretty sure she's not on LinkedIn and will never be on LinkedIn.
If you've told LinkedIn that it may crawl your email addresses to identify people you know, then it is doing the same. I would not let LinkedIn crawl my email addresses personally. Everybody's doing something evil. If you're not, you're going to lose. I don't mean be evil. I mean be interesting, take advantage of opportunities that are there, don't be stupid. When Gmail came out, there was a managed scarcity thing, right? GitHub did the same thing. Farmville. This is my favorite example of an exploit. When Farmville came out, the app posted to your friends' feeds, hey, Alistair's cows need some grain. Click here to give them some grain. And when you did, you installed Farmville. It was really annoying for a while. And then Facebook patched it so that apps couldn't post to feeds. They literally found an exploit. Like, hey, we can use the feed to post something to someone else's message and get them and acquire them as a customer. And Facebook, literally patched the vulnerability. They changed the process. When you start thinking about growth and hacking, you start to realize why it's called growth hacking. There's this sort of subversive, what's the angle? Let me give you an example of a subversive civil servant. This is the conveyor belt in Houston's airport. Baggage took about, on average, 9 minutes to come from the plane to this conveyor belt. And when the airport surveyed people and said, how long, what is your biggest complaint? People said, my biggest complaint is I had to wait too long for my bags. I'll say that again, I had to wait too long for my bags. So they spent millions and millions of dollars and they retooled the baggage handling system, inconvenienced tons of people, got the time down from 9 minutes to 6 minutes, which is amazing. Number one complaint, I have to wait too long for my bags. And then some enterprising civil servant said, hey, I know, let's try parking the planes further away and see what happens. Complaints went to 0. That person was a growth hacker. I got a metric, people who complain about having to wait for their bags too long. I want to get to 0. What's the easiest, fastest way to do it that won't cost me a lot to test? That's what a growth hacker is. I can tell you all these other examples, but you have to have a bit that flips in your head and goes, I'm subversive. What's my angle? It's not a scam, it's enterprising, it's guerrilla, it's sort of, this is the kind of thinking. Every one of the companies I've talked to that's successful thinks like this. And I can't necessarily train it, but it's something you have to realize. If you're not thinking like this, you should not be the one in charge of growth at your organization. If you are thinking like this, you should probably go to talk to Jeroen or wherever he went, or one of the other guys in t-shirts. There's other things you can do. If you don't know, everything can be an experiment, right? Every single thing you're doing in the universe is some kind of experiment. I've often said that there are 2 things that make a startup great. The first is that it's obvious in hindsight. Of course, I don't want to stand on the street waving my arm looking for a taxi who may or may not try to run me down and then pay him my money in cash when I'm drunk. Not that last night was fun. But also that they have the baby steps to get there. So I need to have 2 things. I need to have a vision that's obvious in hindsight, like a product that's obvious, and I need to have the baby steps to get there. So for example, in the case of baby steps, Netflix was not called Postage Flix or Postal Flix. Netflix knew that it wanted to get to market and that broadband was not widely available. So the baby step was, we will turn the postal system into a very, very high latency, very high bandwidth broadband system. There's a famous line, never underestimate the bandwidth of a station wagon full of hard drives driving down the highway. Jim Gray, late Jim Gray from Microsoft said that. This was a really good way to create a broadband network that didn't exist. That was their baby step. And then it allowed them to become the dominant player in streaming video. When Elon Musk launched Tesla, he said, my first car will be a sports car. And people complained that he built a sports car. He said, that's the only car I could build to get the kinks worked out with a market that was comfortable with slightly uncomfortable things and was willing to, accept feedback and so on. This was intentionally his first step to getting to the mainstream car. His third car is his mainstream car. Twitter. Everybody forgets that Twitter was actually 140 characters because of SMS. The first version of Twitter, there weren't enough smartphones to go around, so you could use Twitter to tweet by SMSing to a particular address. And there's 160 characters in SMS. There's 20 characters for your name and 140 characters for the message. It's not a made-up number. SMS was Twitter's baby step before smartphones were widely available. Another example, this is a new one, but I think is really funny, is Uber. Today, that's not actually a picture of Uberpool. It's not that bad. Today, Uber has services like Uberpool, and any old person can drive the car. But when they started out, they went after towns where there was a surplus of limos per capita, limos who were already certified to drive. The only law on the limos thing was they weren't allowed to pick up on the street without a pre-order. That's the difference between a taxi and a limo. In New York City, a limo can pick up anywhere, but it has to be ordered in advance. A taxi can pick up anywhere when it's hailed. The difference is a $1.5 million medallion on the taxi. Uber went, gee, that sounds like an opportunity. So they went to cities like Seattle, where there's a very high number of limos per capita. And you know what they did? They ordered limos and rode around in them talking to the limo drivers until they got enough of them to say yes, and then they started the app. I mean, it's great when you can pay $30 to meet each customer, and they have to listen to you and drive around for 15 minutes, right? And you're sitting in a limo, so it's not that bad. That's a pretty cool business model, good baby step, right? And then eventually, when they now had enough demand, they could put cars in, and then they could do carpooling. And now I was at Austin South by Southwest. They had pedicabs, the cabs that people are running around with. Those were on Uber. At one point, a hearse went by. I'm like, when is they're going to have Uber hearse? Like, that'll be... But they had a baby step, right? They started with town cars in places where the town cars were idling a lot. Those people were already certified to drive and so on. Okay, where do you go? Do you want to do a break at some point? It's 8 o'clock now? You want me to keep going? You sure? All right. Let me see. Where am I? All right, we're going to get into how not to fail. So any questions? Anybody need to take a bio break? Okay, I'm at a point where I'll start with a few things and then we'll take a break. Okay. So let's talk about how not to fail. So I haven't done this slide deck much, but Jeroen said, can you do some unusual stuff that isn't just the normal lean analytics talk? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how not to fail as startups. I can't tell you how to succeed. If I could, I'd go kick your ass, take your company, and I'd win in your market. But I can tell you how to avoid failure, because I've seen a lot of things, at least some forms of it, that make companies fail. And the reality is that a significant percentage of businesses are going to fail anyway. All you need to do as a startup is not fail for a while, and you'll be the dominant vendor. The number of businesses that fail by year 10 is 71% across all businesses. Those that are still operating after 4 years, information technology businesses have the lowest chance of still operating. So you're already doomed, right? Like you're going to die, and you're going to die more because you're in IT and more because you're a startup. So if you can just survive, you're going to do better than 9 out of 10 of your competitors, which is awesome. Why do they die? Well, it turns out there's a lot of reasons why. Lack of managerial experience, sheer incompetence, neglect, fraud, and disaster, lack of industry experience. So it turns out sheer incompetence actually has meanings. Emotional pricing, where you set your pricing not based on market facts, but instead on what you feel. Living too high for the business, you're spending a lot of money you can't really afford to. Non-payment of taxes, no knowledge of your pricing, lack of planning, no knowledge of financing, no experience in record keeping. So, I mean, do those things, right? The managerial experience is things like practices granting credit to customers, rapid expansion, inadequate borrowing practices, not carrying enough inventory, no knowledge of your suppliers, wasted advertising budget. Only 1% of the time is it neglect, fraud, or outright disaster. These are basic, just know how to run a business things, right? So there's some interesting things behind this. The first thing is an entrepreneur is maybe not a founder. The goal of a startup is to discover a new business model in an uncertain environment. Remember that the goal is to discover a new business model. It's not to grow an existing business model. It's to discover a new one. And that means that learning trumps planning. If you're spending a lot of time planning things, it's probably the wrong thing to do. A startup, as Steve Blank says, is an organization designed to search for a sustainable, repeatable business model. Those are very important words. You're designed to search. You're actively looking for it. It's sustainable, which means that even without your daily involvement, it will continue to grow based on the actions of your customers. It is repeatable, meaning I can do it over and over again. I can't just do it with 3 companies. And it's a model. I can draw it on a diagram. I can understand how the thing works. The problem is many people who are entrepreneurs are not startup founders. So an entrepreneur is someone who is very good at a known business model and can out-execute the competition. They're focused on getting less risk and less reward, and their job is to steal the best practices from others and improve them. You may open a hair salon. You are an entrepreneur. You probably have a known business model. I'm going to cut people's hair and make money from it. Your job is to be better at cutting hair, cheaper, faster, nicer. You're not as focused on risk, but you're not going to make billions of dollars running a hair salon. But your job is to steal and improve things. Every day you're looking at what other hair salons are doing and taking their best ideas and stealing them, right? On the other hand, a startup founder is looking for a new business model. They're trying to discover a new product and a new market first. They're focused on a lot of risk, but also a lot of reward, with a Doge hat tip. And they're defining and inventing a new business model. So they're out there, plowing the snow and inventing new stuff. Remember, the goal over here is to discover this new business model in an uncertain environment. One of the hardest questions I ask people when they're a startup is your idea a roof rack or a steering wheel? And it's not just hard because the question makes no sense, but the answer is really sad. When you buy a car, does it come with a steering wheel? Does it come with a roof rack? Why not? Roof rack is not necessary. It's not inherent in the carness, right? People buy steering wheels aftermarket. Hobbyists, people with unusually large hands. There's a market for it. It's not a very big market. But the steering wheel is almost always sold with a car and almost never bought aftermarket. Because the car as a thing can't function without that steering wheel, but also that thing when it's introduced is inherent to the car. Seatbelts are now inherent in cars because seatbelts are required for safety reasons, but you don't sort of sell aftermarket seatbelts or decide to put one in. Roof racks, on the other hand, you can sell as a standalone product. They're independent of car. I can choose which car it goes on. A lot of people like that stuff. They're very easy to deploy. The car still functions without it, and so on. And so when I sit down and talk to founders, a lot of times, I spend a bunch of time talking to people in the cloud infrastructure space. And there are a lot of people who are like, well, you make a management tool for clouds, like RightScale or something like that. I ask them, well, is your thing a steering wheel or a roof rack? Because if the product you make is inherently part of something else, like nobody wants a cloud without a management system. then either you're going to get acquired by someone or that person will build it as part of their ecosystem. So RightScale used to have a cloud management tool back when everyone was using keystrokes to deploy in Amazon. Well, now Amazon has a lot of pretty good management tools. So that makes it really hard for RightScale to find an exit or find its own market. So the question you got to ask is, am I a standalone thing, or is what I'm making something that will eventually become a part of the ecosystem I'm in, and I'm in a lot of trouble unless they acquire me? What RightScale should have done is taken an offer by Amazon to get acquired early on and become Amazon's steering wheel, if you will. And so a lot of people have a hard time being honest about this, asking themselves, I built a thing, I think it's neat. Oh, it turns out it's not that neat. It's actually just a part of a bigger solution. And this is a really, really difficult question to pose yourself, but you have to ask yourself, can my thing stand alone independent of the platform it's built on? Twitter recently shut down its API for data sift. So Twitter, years ago, bought a company called GNIP. DataSift, which was GNIP's competitor, had like a 2 or 3 year runway where they'd license the thing, and the license expired, and Twitter went, we choose not to renew it. Goodbye, DataSift. Twitter looked at all the traffic that was coming in on desktop clients, and they went, hey, TweetDeck's doing pretty well, we'll buy that, thank you. Twitter looked at search engines, and they found the one search engine that was getting the most traffic in the early days of Twitter and said, we'll buy that, thank you. Any large platform is like a spider in the middle of a web, and the API is the strings on the web, and the spider sits there and listens to what's tugging and then goes, I'll take that one. And as soon as it takes that one, it just bought a steering wheel. It doesn't need any more steering wheels. If you're making steering wheels, you suck. You're done, right? And so a lot of startups think they're standalone products, but they are actually part of the carness of a solution. We have an idea of what Twitter should include, and it should probably include real-time stream analytics at billions of messages a second. It should include search. It should include a desktop client. That's what, in our brains, the Twitter-ness is like. When Meerkat came out, everyone was like, yay, Meerkat, this is really awesome. And a week later, Twitter went, yeah, we have one of those called Periscope. Any questions? Because guess what? The feature that Meerkat introduced is something that was part of the Twitter-ness of Twitter. And a lot of people don't start thinking strategically about the ecosystem of which they're a part. And so they inadvertently wind up building a steering wheel when they should have been building a roof rack. Yes?
How do you deal with that in the beginning? Because it could also enhance your growth in the beginning of getting a lot of users from a platform like Twitter, for example.
So I didn't say there was an easy answer. I just said don't build steering wheels. The way you do that is you have to understand at a strategic point of view how you are what the platform you're building on looks like. So in RightScale's case, one of the things they did is they said, well, we do private and public cloud management. We also work with Rackspace and so on. That limits their target market to people who want cross-platform cloud deployment, but they have one there, right? So in the case of TweetDeck, one of TweetDeck's competitors, they could have said, well, we've built clients for all the other things and become like a Radian 6 or a Crimson Hexagon and said, we're actually a cross-platform social media monitoring tool. So one solution is to diversify so you're not beholden to any one platform. There are a bunch of others. But then it becomes an arms race where that guy cuts you off, and it's called business, right? So the gerrymandering of standards, those kinds of things happen. Diversification is one of them, not putting all your eggs in one basket. Focusing on being acquired. I mean, exits are good, so the guys at TweetDeck are probably pretty happy. So if you're a steering wheel, just make sure that the company who makes the car knows you're the best steering wheel in the world, and it's easier to buy you than to build their own. And my friend Randy Smerrick has this great line about you have to realize that your company is your product. So you have a pitch deck for your product. You should have a pitch deck for your company. You think about positioning of your product. You think about positioning of your company. You look at customers who buy your product. You should look at acquirers who buy your company and spend like a day a week thinking of your company as your product. There's a great stat that shows that 97% of all exits will be acquisitions. So if I told you with certainty, 97% certainty you will be acquired if you get an exit, shouldn't you spend some time focusing on the acquisition as the likely exit? So I mean, you need to spend time thinking about product strategy and company strategy. A lot of people don't do that. They're so busy coding the next feature. There are a lot of degrees of uncertainty in business. So at one end of uncertainty is, hey, I've got a market with an unmet need. I've defined a job to be done. I've drawn a business diagram like the systems diagram I showed you with SaaS and so on. I've got a business model and I've got a business plan. And over there on the left, it's really uncertain. Does the market exist? Is the need real? Does the market know it needs that thing? Over here on the right, it's really certain. Can you do what you said you would do when you said you would do it? If you're running a hair salon, you probably have a business plan you took to your bank. Can you cut 7 heads of hair a day for 5 days a week for 30 euros a head of hair. Can you rent a place for 200 euros or less a week? Okay, here's a loan. Very, very certain, right? Business plan. I can even show you how that grows over time, how much it costs to hire people, and so on. Over there on the left, I found a market with an unmet need, really, really uncertain. People aren't going to give you money. And so what you're doing is you're understanding the level of uncertainty at which you're having a conversation and marrying that to the level of products direction and whether you're a founder or an entrepreneur. A founder is going to be way over there on the left looking for markets and unmet needs, searching for new business models for them. An entrepreneur, nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur. Most people are entrepreneurs, not founders. But an entrepreneur is going to be over here with a well-defined business plan. There's an old line that I think it may be in here, so I'll steal my own thunder. Asking a startup for a business plan is like asking Columbus for a map of the world before he's left port. I'm okay with the business model. Columbus would have said, I'm going to sail west. If I hit something, I'll let you know. Right? But I'm not okay with the business plan because he can't possibly know. All right, growth. I talked earlier about how sustainable growth comes from user actions and that it better be over 5% a week. There's a very important reason as a startup why growth matters so much, because early on, growth is everything. It's oxygen. You need customers to keep learning. If you don't have users, you can't try out ideas. And also, growth is a substitute for solvency. If you can't raise money, you haven't monetized things yet, people will lend you money based on demonstrated customer engagement or growth of engaged customers. So I'll give you one more thought on growth, and then I'll end with this for now, and we'll have a break. What are you really growing? One of the things that I don't think we talk about enough is that there are 3 currencies in the online economy. One currency you're familiar with is money. Pretty simple. Revenue, whatever, ad clicks. But there's a second currency online, which is reputation. Reputation could be PageRank. It could be things like number of Twitter followers, whatever. It could be anything that looks like an endorsement of you being who you are. You know, you have a Wikipedia page, things like that. And then there's attention. And attention is simply how much awareness can you get about a thing. Those 3 currencies, reputation, attention, and money, are the 3 currencies of the internet. And the smartest internet businesses, I'm going to try and show you this, probably it's a little bit small. The smartest internet businesses are exchanges between those 3. So for example, if I have someone's attention, I'm Google. You come to me and you search for something. I have attention. I can turn it into money by taking your money and letting you have search results that are high up. So Google is an exchange between money and attention. You pay me money, I will make sure you show up in search results. Google is just an exchange between 2 currencies, the currency of money and the currency of attention. Going the other way, if I have someone's attention, you come to my website, then I can convert you. I can get you down the sales funnel. That's moving from attention to money. This is sales conversion, right? If I have reputation and I want to get attention, if my site is known as the best website for coffee, I have attention. I have high page rank because my reputation leads to attention because of how PageRank works, because of word of mouth, because of virality. On the other hand, if I have attention and I do something good, I get heroism. Bill Gates had a lot of attention, did good stuff. He's now got much better reputation than when he was building Windows. That guy that landed the plane on the Hudson was not a jerk about it, had a moment of attention, turned it into reputation. Selflessness, perceived value. And then down here, taking some money and using it to buy reputation is public relations, it's philanthropy, it's patronage. If I create a foundation, I take my money and I do something good with it, I've improved my reputation. I'm buying reputation. I may pay a PR company to make me look good. I'm buying reputation. Taking reputation and turning it into money is endorsement or product placement. If I have a reputation as a famous star or something like that, or a person who's seen as having good taste, and then I attach my name to a fragrance or a watch, I'm taking some of my reputation and turning it into money. And probably losing some reputation in the process, which is why a lot of movie stars endorse products in countries where they're not famous. A lot of them do it in Japan, for example. It's really important to think about these 3 currencies. Whenever a company takes an action on the internet, how does it change your money? How does it change your reputation? And how does it change your attention? If my website is covered in ads, I might make more money out of my attention. People come to my site, and I make a lot of money. But my reputation goes down pretty fast because I look like crap. So in many cases, when there's a thing that you do, you have to weigh the cost. It's an exchange, right? What is my exchange rate? And startup success is often about your exchange rate between those 3. One of the reasons Google is such a successful company is that it is an exchange rate between reputation, attention, and money. It is the mercantile exchange for the three currencies of the internet. When you make decisions as a startup, if you don't think about reputation, attention, and money in those decisions, and come up with like a triple bottom line of how does this affect those three things, you are probably going to make bad decisions. You'll do stuff I'll give you a great example. Gail Ennis, who is the head of marketing she's the chief marketing officer for Omniture. I had a conversation with her at the Omniture Summit a couple of years ago. And she said, Alistair, and we were talking about optimization, sort of automated ad stuff that does automated A/B testing. She goes, Alistair, what do you think the best thing is for clicks? I said, what do you mean? She goes, there's one thing that drives clicks more than anything else. Really? What's that? Breasts. I said, what do you mean? She goes, cleavage. Cleavage drives clicks like you would not believe. Honestly, there's a conference I was involved in, and we try really hard at all the conferences to get diverse. We actually get to like 50% female speakers and stuff. And this particular conference, I won't say which one, had like a cheese board, they call it, of like pictures of all the speakers. And I did the Google overlay to look at click-throughs, and all of the click-throughs were like stereotypically slim blonde women, had huge click-throughs, and everything else was just no. It's amazing, right? And so I said this to Gail. I'm like, this is a weird stat. She goes, yeah, the problem is if you tried to monetize that, you lose reputation immediately. So it's a shareholder value thing. You did it for one day, you got a lot of clicks, but then no one's actually going to buy that thing. They're just going to say you're a sexist bastard. So there's this trade-off between I could use that to gain attention at the cost of reputation. And every startup needs to weigh these three metrics of money, reputation, and attention and make a decision about how they're going to position themselves. Hopefully they make decisions that are not disreputable and horrible. But people don't think about those three currencies. They do a thing, go, hey, this particular, I'm going to buy 1 million Twitter followers. Well, you know what that does? That lowers your reputation on Twitter because Twitter knows that you bought a bunch of followers. So startup success is often about the exchange rate you can earn between those. If you're really good at spending a small amount of money and driving attention because you're excellent at content marketing, for example, that's great. That's your key success factor. But people don't spend enough time thinking about these three currencies of the online economy. So one thing I think startups need to do to not fail is consider the consequences of their actions, not look for the cheap wins like things that are going to get clicks but destroy the company's reputation. All right, I think it's probably time to take a short break. Yes? It's a good place to stop. We'll come back and talk about a few more how not to fails and then wrap up.